child, I grew up in an environment of religious extremism where parents of the religious variety, specifically Baptists or later Calvinists, had a very strict adherence where their kids, my siblings and I, were forced to believe in their beliefs. My parents pretty much forbid any difference of opinion, any contention, differences in theology, and it bled down into inability to view anything but Christianity as a positive, life-affirming choice. So for those who grew up in environments like this, it really, really does get dark. The religious absolutism and authoritarian parenting, the high control religious behavior, spiritual abuse, and enmeshment. Enmeshment is when there's a blurring of boundaries between parents and children, where children are not allowed to have separate thoughts, beliefs from the parents, or between the parents' beliefs and the relationships. It's so prevalent in religious homes, it can actually get kids killed. There are countries around the world that if you believe or leave a faith, I think it's called apostasy, they kill you. So yeah, enmeshment is a dysfunctional relationship dynamic, often within families of religion, where personal boundaries are blurred, causing individuals to lack autonomy and become overly emotionally entangled. It's characterized by excessive dependence, lack of privacy, and guilt, which hinders emotional development. So when it comes to blurred boundaries, no separation between personal lives, thoughts, or feelings, a lack of independence, an inability to make simple decisions without others' approval, excessive control. Parents may treat children as confidants or through sabotaging their independence, such as sabotaging employment, sabotaging friendships, or turning siblings against each other. Emotional entanglement, feeling responsible for another person's emotions and unhappiness. Guilt and obligation, when religious parents guilt or create a guilt response to a difference of opinion or an action that is different than what parents want you to do. What are the causes of enmeshment? Parental insecurity, loneliness, lack of self-esteem, poor communication, past family dynamics, multi-generational abuse. So how do you create a different kind of dynamic? Well, obviously it probably won't change until you become an adult. You can establish boundaries, practice creating physical and emotional space, develop your self-identity, identifying personal interests, values, and goals that set you apart from family. Seek therapy. Professional help can aid in breaking unhealthy attachment patterns. Build independence. Make independent decisions to learn how to cope. So what's the difference between enmeshment, codependency, and disengagement? Well, when it comes to boundaries, enmeshment is no real boundaries, everyone in each other's business. Codependency, weak boundaries, always putting others first. Disengagement, walls up, everyone keeps to themselves. Emotional neglect, under enmeshment, looks like feeling obligated to meet others' needs, often out of guilt. Codependency, feel needed by fixing or helping others. Disengagement, don't share or talk about feelings much. What about independence? Well, under enmeshment, it looks like wanting space, feels wrong or selfish, seen as betrayal. Codependency, afraid to be on your own. Disengagement, everyone acts like they don't need each other. Identity, under enmeshment, it looks like hard to know who you are outside of a relationship. Codependency, self-worth comes from being needed. Disengagement, doesn't feel connected to others. A good example of enmeshment is a mom expects her grown child to tell her everything and feels hurt if they don't. Codependency, a partner ignores their own needs to fix the other person. Disengagement, family members rarely talk, especially when something is wrong.
Head to your pickup at McDonald's register.
So what happens when you grow up in families that use enmeshment as a tool of control, getting people to conform, and use guilt to control future or present behavior? Well, my family used religion as a way to cohese everything together. And if you didn't grow up in a religious environment, you may not have experienced religious enmeshment. It's basically creating an environment where any disagreements, any close or different decisions, interpretations, lifestyles, interests are met with hostility. So my parents never supported really any of my interests outside of academics. Basically, any interest I had that didn't have to do with my studies was not something my parents supported. Any colors, any animals, any interests were really targeted as it's not biblically okay. If I liked a specific kind of animal, if it wasn't shown in the Bible to be an image or symbol of something positive, my mother would forbid me from liking it. When I got older, when I started gaining interests like Greek mythology, Harry Potter, or any form of Disney animation, my mother would not support it and actually set it on fire in the backyard. Autonomy was not something that has ever been acceptable, taught, maintained, or fought for in my family. They do not believe it exists. There is so much enmeshment in my family with just relationship dynamics. Even as an adult, everyone in my family still believes they have a right to know where I am, what I'm doing, and who I'm with. Because when I was young, under 24, when I lived at home under the thumb of my family, I was not allowed to have friends. Did they prohibit it? Not usually. They basically would turn you against families or kids so you didn't want to be around them due to theological differences of opinion, or if their mother wasn't traditional enough. Because, like I said earlier, being Christian isn't good enough. You have to be the right kind of Christian, and even if you're in the right denomination, my parents still wouldn't like you. They did not tolerate ever any differences of opinion. And this is why I had to come out as an atheist and as a queer ally back in October of 2025. My family basically created an image of myself that they never checked on me since I left home to find out if that's even accurate. They don't care if it's accurate. If it's something that makes them happy, if it's an image, a facade, in a lifestyle that is easy to handle, is traditional, something that doesn't require them to live outside of their comfort zone. If it's something easy to handle, they don't have to grow. They don't have to deal with the problem. It's not inconvenient. But the second you choose to be something that isn't Calvinistic Christianity, they will never act like we even had the conversation. None of my family have, well, my oldest brother, who's 15 years older than me, his wife reached out with 2 texts, and I hadn't talked to them since 2018. They live on the other side of the U.S., and we're just not that close. No one else in my family has made any effort to get to know me as who I am now. After the deconstruction, they've made no effort. It's as though I've never come out, and they're not willing to even ask if I'm okay. I mean, anyone with with an inch of compassion would know that if you tell people or share intimate secrets and talk about things that are hard, the person would be vulnerable and need assurances, acceptance. My family doesn't do any of those things. It's called enmeshment. If you get out from under the expectations and very close-knit behavioral expectations, it's as though that behavior does not exist. They basically reset the room so the conversation never happened. They act as though they do not know that you are anything but what they want you to be. This is extremely toxic behavior. I mean, it's as though they're living vicariously through you, like you're a Disney mom, where they create a scenario where they live their best life and feel like they're an amazing parent because you believe everything they do. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that people who do this or my family are insidiously evil people. Of course not. People are complex. My family are products of their own childhood, their own background, their own religious dogma. That's not to say it's acceptable or that it's okay. I'm saying I do understand where these kind of parents and where these kind of people come from. They are so terrified of believing anything different because they believe they'll go to hell or that it's the devil luring them away. And I talked to my sister about it just today. They don't want me to talk about my atheism. They actually made it a family rule. Do not talk about your religion. Don't talk about your deconstruction. My father actually told me back in October not to call my mother because it upsets her. And my response was, well, if you didn't have such dogmatic, immovable expectations for me being a human being where you think you own me and have rights to my choices, she wouldn't be upset. Abusive situations are usually created by the same people who make themselves the biggest victims. If my family did not expect me to be a straight, cis, one-dimensional kind of person who basically believes they're inferior to men, if I was anything like that, they would be fine. But because I can't and I won't be that one-dimensional, they don't know what to do with me. It's 2026. You don't have to be anything you don't want to be as long as it's legal and nobody's being hurt. We shouldn't even have these problems anymore. But we do, because there are religions and families and straight traditions that will not let anybody be anything that is not permissible. And by permissible, I mean just normal. We need to stop believing that people are straight by default because everybody's straight. They're not. And enmeshment is very, very difficult to overcome. It's not impossible. Go to therapy, set boundaries. Even if you are not an adult, everyone has a right to their own privacy, their own space, their own opinions. Whether you're 6 years old, 16, 25, or 60, everyone has a right to come to their own understanding of the world. Even if you're a 16-year-old who believes in evolution and your parents believe in creationism, everyone has a right to their own opinion. Even if your parents will disown you and kick you out. I would always tell people who aren't physically and financially responsible for themselves or independent yet to wait until you are, so you don't get in a precarious situation. But if you're in an environment that doesn't allow you to be your own person, who doesn't embrace who you are, makes you feel guilty for having standards, expectations, and for being different, this is not a healthy place to be. That doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means they're not a safe place to be. And I would talk about this all the time in therapy, where I never felt emotionally safe in my house. Not with my siblings, not with my parents. There's so much expectation and control in my religious home. It would take months to write it down. Nobody has a right to control what people think, what they believe, what they desire, regardless of your age. You can be 10 years old, have your own opinions, theories, religious beliefs. You may not be able to attain the autonomy to act it out because you may live in a religious home and have to go to church. But if your parents don't want to hear what you have to say and make you feel like you're going to hell for having a difference of opinion, they're the problem. As long as everyone respects each other, shows tolerance, and doesn't damn people to hell or treat religious people like they're stupid, just show respect for people. The problem in my family is there is no respect for anyone if they don't believe the way you do, which is Calvinistic Christianity. And it shouldn't be this hard. The amount of narcissism that's required to believe that 5 kids, 2 parents, and all their spouses and kids will believe the same way they do is utter narcissism. There is no way that at least 3 people is going to have a problem. So you might be asking, for those who've been in therapy, what's the difference between enmeshment and emotional incest? Enmeshment is more focused on the thoughts, behavior, beliefs, and action of a person. It's more of combining many people's things together without individuality and autonomy allowed. Emotional incest is more of a parent using a child as a transference of a partner. So let's say a father and mother don't have a partner. They instead use their adult or child as an emotional crutch, or they give their child emotionally and mentally what they would a romantic partner. A good example would be Psycho. Enmeshment is not romantic or sexual transference. It's mental, belief, and psychological control. Your parents don't see you as something they're using instead of an adult. There's a difference. They see you as an extension of themselves. They don't see you as a replacement for an actual partner. That's the difference. Emotional incest is when an adult uses their kid as a replacement for a romantic partner, while enmeshment is using a child as an extension of themselves, as a legacy or as a control mechanism. That doesn't make it any less sick, it just makes it a little less creepy. I'm not a romantic replacement for my parents, but what I do and how I do it is an extension of themselves. There really is no difference between me and my parents. Not really. They see me as a cookie-cutter version of themselves. They don't want to use me as partner replacement. They just see me as an extension of their identity. This is very, very, very common in helicopter and lawnmower parenting. So no, it's not emotional incest, but it is enmeshment. And it can be very dangerous because it can stunt people's development, emotional and sexual exploration, maturity, and growth. I honestly believe being born in the family I did with enmeshment is the reason why I didn't experience a sexual or emotional romantic awakening until my mid-20s, which is 10 years after most people, when they go through puberty. Enmeshment can be extremely harmful because there isn't boundaries. And if there are boundaries, they're like goalposts. They can be moved. And healthy boundaries are movable, but they're not centered around things like guilt, the silent treatment, coercion, forced conformity. Healthy boundaries aren't weaponized. It's like a pasture where it teaches and helps people understand how to have respect and to have healthy communication. Weaponizing boundaries is bad because it destroys positive communication, it creates resentment. People who genuinely love and care about you want to know where your boundaries start and where they end. They want you to interpret how they interact with you as a positive experience. When people weaponize boundaries, make you feel bad for having boundaries, or try to force you into forced conformity, this is not healthy behavior. When your parents, or even when your spouse, does not allow you to have your own identity, and they force conformity as a single unit, a family, or as a partnership, this is called enmeshment. I was never allowed to have any beliefs that were outside of the very tiny little part of Christianity my parents did. And if they moved to a different denomination or tweaked or completely changed their view of Christianity, I was expected to join another church, even in my 20s, because my parents went there. The level of codependency in enmeshment cannot be understated. It's very muddy, and it's sick. You should want your kids to have their own identity, their own interests, their own beliefs. Now, you may not allow a child to go to another church because of, safety and transportation, but you should want your kids to evaluate family beliefs, traditions, and try to grow into the person they want to be, so by the time they go to college, they have a little of a clue who they are. And when I look back at the kind of person I was when I was 18, I was so under the control and thumb of my parents, I would never have chosen anything but their form of Christianity, because when you believe hell is on the end of every choice that isn't their tiny brand of Christianity, that's not a choice, that's resignation. In my family, they erase and invalidate any experience, any trauma, anything that isn't something they personally experienced and felt that exact way. So my 4 siblings can experience the same things I did, and for some wonderful reason, they did not interpret awful parenting as trauma. So when I say I interpret it that way, they invalidate it, they laugh at me, they basically make it very clear that I'm imagining it. And this is called gaslighting. And I told her earlier today, just because you don't interpret a terrible parenting technique that has impacted my life and my emotional security, just because you didn't interpret that behavior as traumatic doesn't make it any less traumatic. Just because you don't interpret a behavior as something besides child abuse when it is child abuse does not make my experience any less valid. But in this family, they invalidate, erase, make fun, and absolutely refuse to critique anyone in authority. And this is why I always tell people, if you cannot critique authority, you are in a dangerous situation. That doesn't mean abuse will happen. I'm saying it's one of those environments that is so easily able to produce, maintain, enable, and cover up abuse. I'm shocked if abuse doesn't happen. When you cannot safely critique and hold authority accountable, you are creating an environment that makes abuse so likely. How does it not happen? glad when it doesn't, but I'm shocked if it doesn't. And that's what the whole thing is about my family. I announced in October I'm an atheist, I'm a queer ally, I'm a liberal. I don't call myself a Democrat because I don't want to be loyal to a particular political party, because both main political parties are so corrupt and they don't consistently help minorities and queer people and women. I don't want to have that much loyalty when I can vote for a third party. But I do call myself a liberal feminist. I don't think I have a trait that my parents will accept or have a conversation about. I mean, you have to be their tiny little narrow view of Christianity, or they will not accept it or even talk about it. Not once. Being a feminist is as bad as being a Satan worshiper. Being a queer ally is like being a whore. Even though that's a terrible analogy, that's how they feel. There's no grayness in my family. You are either believing the right thing on the white side, or you believe something that's damning you to hell. And like I've always said, there is no grayness in my family, period, unless it's the hair on my parents' head. That's funny. They don't want to discuss anything that will force them to reevaluate what they believe. And I don't want my parents to change their opinions. That's not how I want validation. Nobody should come out to receive validation. People should only come out for any reason because they're tired of everyone believing a lie or a false narrative. And there's many other reasons too. If your family is so immature that their facade hinges on everyone believing the same thing and there's no room for any differences or religious differences, this is what I call a monopoly. It's a power keg, a stronghold. There is no room for anything else. And it's called conditional love. If your parents won't talk to you about things that are important to you, that you've brought to their attention because they are not emotionally and spiritually equipped to talk about it, this is not a healthy environment. If one of my siblings woke up tomorrow and said that they were a Wiccan, I would ask them questions. I would want to know what pushed them from one lane to another. Why did they veer so sharply to a different point of view? I don't believe that being a Wiccan is a right thing or a wrong thing. It's just a thing. Any more than being a woman is a problem or being a 12-year-old kid is a problem. It's not. I firmly believe that all religions are man-made creations for false assurances. But if somebody wants to believe whatever they want to believe, as long as it's not hurting anyone and it's not a danger to their autonomy, I don't care what they're doing. When they start indoctrinating kids and yelling at women getting abortions, calling them the W word, that's when religion becomes wrong. But if my older sibling woke up tomorrow and said, I'm a Wiccan or a Catholic, I would be interested to see how someone who is so dogmatic and unshakable, what could push them in another direction out of curiosity. I would support them in whatever way they needed me to. I would make sure they were okay. Not because they changed their mind, but because when you are so ingrained in a religion and then change course, you can be a very emotionally vulnerable person in a very emotionally vulnerable place. I would make sure that they are okay. But at the end of the day, it's their life. I don't have an opinion. I really do not. Why would I? The only opinion I probably would have is, as long as you're safe, happy, and it's making you the best version of yourself, Like, I just don't understand. If you have to be right about everything, where there is no chance of anything happening or whatever it is, you need to reassess your priorities. If it's that important that everyone believes in your God out of 100,000 gods, people are more important than whatever God you think is important. And maybe it's something that people who haven't grown up or married into enmeshment may or may not understand until you educate yourself about it. When you grow up in an environment that doesn't have boundaries, and I'm going to explain some of the boundaries that we did not have as a child. My parents controlled the length of my haircut, the clothes I wore, and I'm not talking about choosing or not choosing clothing based on attending school. I was homeschooled. It did not matter what clothes I wore because there was no dress code. My parents dressed me like I was in the 1950s. I'm not kidding. Imagine trad wife. You would be about right, except I wasn't an adult. My hair had to be as long where it touched my waist. I had to dress very 19 kids and counting. My parents didn't say I couldn't wear sandals or that I needed a longer dress. I'm talking about I didn't dress like anyone else in any room. That's the kind of control I'm talking about. If I had to stay home for some reason on Sunday, the only movie I could watch was a movie about the Bible. I did not watch mainstream movies. I watched movies produced by the same people as VeggieTales or The Bible Man. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can Google that. I never went to the theater. I've never listened to the radio unless somehow one of my Walkmans could pick up the radio. And we only listened and watched biblical accounts, biblical stories, audio dramas about the Bible. I never went to the theater to watch things like Toy Story. I did not see Toy Story until I was in my mid to late 20s. My religion villainized anything that wasn't one very tiny part of Christianity. And this is the whole problem about enmeshment. When you basically teach your kids to be afraid of anything that is not Christianity, and even within Christianity, there's fear of becoming too Presbyterian, too Arminianist, too Baptist, too progressive. My family used the word progressive Christian, the word progressive or liberal Christian, as an insult. They used it in the same way someone would use the N-word or the F slur for gay people. They would rather be dead than be a liberal progressive Christian, because that meant you were worldly and you were going to hell, you just were playing church. There was so much enmeshment in my life. Basically, I was my mother just as a child. I had to dress like her, look like her, act like her. My education, she taught. It was basically 19 kids and counting. Thankfully, without the brothers who touched me. Luckily, that did not happen. There was no bodily autonomy. There were no boundaries. And once you reached 18, nothing changed. I still tell my therapist to this day, there was no difference between being 25 and being 15. If they could claim you as a dependent, you were basically a toddler. You had no autonomy. You could not leave the house. And if they somehow allowed you to leave their house, it was just for work and they gave you no permission to go anywhere else. You had to drive straight home. I was 21 and they still had those rules. They believed that if you stayed in their house rent-free, they could control every aspect of your life, even things you did outside the house. They made medical decisions for you. They made every decision, period. And imagine being 28 a few years ago and learning that according to the law, when you turn 18, I could have left my house, left my parents' house. I did not have to do anything they told me. Now, because I was in a room in their house, they could have made rules, but they could not force me to keep those rules. If I chose not to keep the rules of the house, they could have given me 30 days to move out. That's not what they did. They basically treated me like a child halfway through my 20s. There was no bodily autonomy. If I went to the doctor, they made all the decisions until I was almost 25. The level of infantilization in my home is ridiculous. According to U.S. law, when you turn 18, the day of your birth, when you turn 18, your parents cannot legally or ethically or morally make decisions on your behalf without a POA or a judge's ruling, without documents. And yet they did. There was no boundaries. If I wanted to date somebody, my parents would have had to approve. They could tell me to break up with somebody. They never allowed me to date, period. They never taught me how to protect myself or how to use gynecological visits to learn about myself. They didn't want me to know anything about my health, my sexuality. Prophylaxis didn't exist. This is the level of enmeshment. There was no bodily autonomy because they made all the choices until I was 24 and a half. They sabotaged my employment. They refused to drop off applications. And when I would give it to my brother to smuggle in somewhere where I could work, he would put it in his trunk, lie and say he dropped it off, and I found it later, at least 3 times. Because they told him they didn't want me to work. I was 22 years old. Any parent who doesn't want their 22-year-old fully functioning adult daughter not to work is not a safe place to be. Your parents should prepare you and force you to get a job if you live at home once you graduate high school. You should not live at home if you are not capable and can get a job. Your parents should want you to leave home as soon as possible or as soon as you're ready. That's their job, to prepare you to be a full functioning adult so your professors in college don't have to babysit you. And my eldest brother, who's 15 years older than me, is a professor at a very well-known Christian university. And he says all the time, half of his class, he has to babysit because the parents did not get their kids ready to function as a fully functioning adult. Their parents are helicopter or lawnmower parents. My parents did not get me ready. Even at 22, I was not ready. If you don't know how to do laundry, and you don't even teach your kid how to drive until they're 19, I got my driver's license at 21, do the math. My parents did not push me to have critical thinking, to reject everything they believed in. And when I mean push me, I mean they didn't make it a safe place to even discuss that I'm having doubts and I want to research other writer since I want to say around the age of 8 or 9. I've written stories, books. I've written 10 novels. I'm rewriting several of the novels now, doing 3rd and 4th drafts. But by the end of summer, I'm going to have at least 10 of my books on Wattpad. Recently, I've uploaded most of the first book onto my YouTube channel. And if you are listening to this, my most recent videos are of that audio drama. You can find them. My parents really did not support me being an author. They really didn't support me to do anything but take Bible class. And yes, they did give me a full-rounded homeschooling education. I mean, I know all the U.S. documents, and I have a well-rounded historical, anatomy, mathematics, history background. But when every year the textbooks were written by Becca, which is a fundamentalist white supremacy hate group, you can imagine the twisted history lessons I learned. And I've made videos about that already. When you grew up in an environment that did not allow you to have differences of opinions, to agree to disagree, where an environment was emotionally safe to talk about things or concerns, not even to the point of deconstruction, but when I was a Christian and I have a difference of theological opinion, I would have never told my parents. They would not have tolerated such division. They just wouldn't. My parents tried to turn me against my oldest brother for being a progressive Christian. You can imagine how that turned out. And it's funny because they accused my brother of turning me against the parents when they were doing the exact same thing. It's always telling. Every accusation is a confession. You wouldn't think so, but it is. When high controlling religious parents accuse you or accuse your siblings of turning you against them, it's a confession. Because they were doing the same thing. And when I talked to my sister about this today, she denies it happening. And it happened until I was 8 years ago. Up until I was 26 years old, it happened. And even when I bring up that they reached out, which ironically, my eldest sibling's wife, my sister-in-law, I've known her since 2004. She was the only one that reached out and said, "Are you okay, honey?" The only one. The people that my parents accused them of turning against my parents were the only people that reached out when I came out. It's really telling. Every accusation is a confession. And anytime I bring up my eldest brother and his family, my parents don't have contact with them. I wonder why. Every time I bring up that extended part of the family, my sister, the first thing that comes out of her mouth is, "Be careful when you talk to them. They'll try to lure you in." And I said, with candy or with critical thinking? Which is it? Anybody who has a difference of opinion, they try to get you not to be around them. Physically, emotionally, verbally, doesn't really matter. Because they believe anyone who isn't their tiny little version of Christianity is trying to trap you and lure you away. Which is funny because, let's be honest here, nobody has created and maintained the insidious behavior of gaslighting controlling and brainwashing and indoctrinating like Christians. Not all Christians, but the ones I've been around are masters at doing it. It's every accusation is a confession. When Christians say, why do liberals brainwash and lure kids away? They're telling on themselves. Christianity would no longer be a big religion if they weren't constantly preying on people in their most vulnerable moments to get them to turn to God. That's why Christians donate during hurricanes, because people are vulnerable. That's when they witness to them. It's pretty simple. It's not complicated. Not all Christians, but that's how Christianity is at its center, at its foundation. And when you grow up in an environment that controls you and doesn't allow you any room to struggle, think differently, research different mediums, my family believes that anything that forces them to reevaluate who they are is from the devil and is trying to lure you away to the fires of the gates of hell. Think about being an 8-year-old child thinking that. And my sister says, I chose to be a Christian. And I said, did you? If Christianity, or this very small-minded view of Christianity, if that's the only thing anyone around you ever talked positively about and made you feel like every other religion, belief system, or denomination of Christianity would send you to the depths of hell, and that this Christianity was the only one that made you feel safe and have an eternity, can you really choose what you chose? I mean, if your parents and every adult in your environment said that this little form of Christianity is the only safe, long-lasting, life-giving, eternity-creating choice, and everything else is a monster or a boogeyman, can you honestly say that choosing the only thing you look positively at is even a choice? You won't choose something you've been taught is a monster. You won't. 9 out of 10 times, if you tell someone their entire life that something will destroy you as a human being, very few people would choose it. Because they will choose the thing they know. Most people will do that. There are exceptions, I'm one of them, but most people choose what they're familiar with, what they feel safe. That's why people would choose a safety blanket over some strange stuffed animal they don't know. That's the way people are. And as long as what you're choosing is something that is good for you, opens your mind up to critical thinking, and makes you the best version of yourself, fine. But if you're only choosing something because that's the only decent thing you've ever seen in your life, that's not a choice. We call it resignation. If you've never been taught or see anything beside your small version of Christianity as something life-giving, healthy, and good for you, you're not going to choose anything else. You're too terrified. That's why they call it indoctrination. And my family can call things whatever they want to. They can put labels on things all they want. But if Hinduism and being a Wiccan, a Catholic, it was never shown as something positive, valid, and worthy of respect, you will not see those things as valuable and worthy of respect. You've been programmed to view it as something dangerous, and you will react the same way children do when they see a potential predator. They will keep their distance, unless they're stupid. That's the way the world works. That's how religion works. They make you afraid of everything. They just do. That's why they tell kids about heaven and hell. And when you're taught the only way to get to the nice place, also known as heaven, is to do these things, believe this tiny little thing, and any other religion, any other way of life that doesn't hurt anybody and is just normal and natural will send you to the flames of hell. Nobody in their right mind would choose the flames of hell. They just wouldn't. It's called resignation. You didn't choose Christianity. You're too afraid not to. The worst part of being familiar is better than a healthy unknown. It's human psychology. And in some circles, I mean, that's really what the Stockholm Syndrome is all about, even though it's not a medically recognized situation. It's a pop culture term. People will always, 99% of the time, they're going to choose what's familiar, even if it kills them, over something that's healthy, safe, and unknown. That's why we choose the white man as president every single time. And yes, we chose Obama once, but it's the same thing. We would rather choose the safe, racist homophobe to be our president because he's a white man, even if he's a rapist, over the unknown, a woman of color who is experienced and would be a good choice. We will always choose the awful choice because it's familiar. And when you're used to something that hurts you, you will actually frame it as your savior. I honestly believe that's why my family sees religion as something good. Because the idea that religion could be hurting you or abusing you or making your life less livable is unimaginable. I think that's why a lot of my siblings don't interpret the terrible things done to them as child abuse, because they're praying to their abuse. That's why a lot of forms of Christianity is like a domestic violence relationship. To realize, imagine, and accept that the relationship you've been living could be potentially a domestic violence situation is unimaginable to people.